Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello and assalamu alaikum everyone. Inshallah, hope everyone's doing well. Today I want to do a video on polygamy. This is a very important topic within Islam, and I think it's especially important to follow up with given my last video, which deals with marriage within Islam. If you haven't had a chance to see that video, please take a look. A lot of what's shared there would benefit you as you're listening to this particular video. Without further ado, I just want to jump into it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So in Islam, there is polygamy, and polygamy is allowed. Of course, polygamy here means that a man is allowed to have more than one wife. And in Islam, there is a maximum of 4 wives that one can have at any one time. Now, there are certain important conditions that need to be met in order for that relationship to be had. The first condition is that a man needs to be wealthy enough to afford a second wife. The reason being is that, and which ties into the third condition, is that he obviously needs to provide for them in an equal manner. I'll touch more on this in a second. The second condition that a man needs to be able to fulfill is that he has to be able to meet their sexual needs equally. Okay? So if he's having, let's say, for instance, 3 wives or 4 wives, but he's having problems, meeting the needs of his first 2 wives, meeting the sexual needs of his first 2 wives, then he's not permitted to have a 3rd or a 4th wife. Okay? So he has to be able to meet the sexual needs of his first 2 wives. As an example, if he has all 4 wives, then he has to be able to perform and satisfy their conjugal rights. And lastly, the last condition is that it's important for him to treat them equally, from a financial standpoint, from a practical standpoint, and even to some extent from an emotional standpoint. So what does that look like? From a financial standpoint, it means that if he has bought one a house, he has to buy all of his other wives a house. If he has a car that quite a luxurious car that he has for one of his wives, if he has more wives, he has to provide the same level of luxury of a car to his other wives, right? He can't just simply get them another car, a car or any car. He has to be relatively within the same financial or within the same budget range. And this is what I mean from a practical standpoint, that the way he is financially supporting, the way he's supporting one wife, he has to be able to financially support the other wives. Now, from an emotional standpoint, he obviously has to treat all of his wives honorably, gently, politely, warmly. He has to be a very warm and gentle, forgiving, patient person. Okay, and we talk a little bit about this in my previous video. This is something, the way that he is with his wives is something that is expected of his wives as well, but certainly this is expected more from him because he is considered the leader within the family, and he needs to be far more considerate, right, and patient and gentle with his spouses. The Quran says, "Then marry other women who seem virtuous to you, 2 or 3 or 4, and if you fear that you cannot do them justice, then only one." So justice is the cornerstone of a marital relationship, whether that is one spouse or multiple spouse. And God says that if you are unable to treat them equally and fairly and justly, then you must be restricted to only one spouse. Because then at least you can try, it would be a lot easier for you to be more just and equitable with one spouse than with multiple. Now, we do have some criticisms from feminism that I want to talk about and address them from an Islamic point of view in regards to polygamy. The first feminist criticism is that polygamy reinforces notions of women as unequal to men and perpetuates the subjugation of women. In polygamous societies, women often have limited agency in choosing their partners, and their economic, social, and emotional well-being can be compromised. So the first issue, right, that polygamy perpetuates the idea that women are unequal to men. While in Islam, women are not seen as unequal to men. Women are seen as being physically different than men, and as such, men are known as their maintainers and protectors. Okay? And as a result, God says that the man has an advantage in terms of his role, right? Because of his physical advantage. But other than that, in the Quran, God says that men and women originate from the same soul and they are equal in the eyes of God. If there's any distinction between these two, it's only with regards to their being more righteous in the eyes of God or being more pious in the eyes of God. Those are the only real distinctions that Muslims can make among themselves. Other than that, there is no claim between a man and a woman with respect to one being more superior to the other. Now, that being said, Islam acknowledges that yes, a man is more physically stronger than a woman, and therefore his rights and responsibilities become different. He is seen as the maintainer and protector of women. In any event, with respect to the rights, Islam says that a man and a woman has equal rights, and I talked about this in a previous video, where there are rights that men have, and women will have rights that are similar with respect to the rights that men have, or equal to respect to the men have. And so, for instance, that it is the right of a woman to expect that her husband satisfies her sexually. Okay? This right is also that of a man. Okay? Another common right is it is expected that a woman should expect that a man treats her gently, that he is patient with her, that he's polite, courteous, sincere, warm, and gentle. And vice versa, a man has a similar right where that he is to expect the same in return. So these are the rights that men and women have as an example. But then their rights start to diverge, or obligations, I should say, diverge as we get into other areas with respect to the fact that the man has a physical advantage over the woman. So, for instance, the woman is not expected to go to war necessarily. I mean, she can, but she's not expected to. Whereas the man is expected to, because he is the protector of women. So this is an expected right of hers upon him. And there are other and so these are just examples of where the obligations differ. And another obligation of a man is that he is expected to be the breadwinner, whereas the woman is not expected to be the breadwinner. She may work, she may have her own career, but she's not expected, her money is not expected to necessarily contribute to the family. So these are examples of women having independence of men with respect to what are their obligations and what are their rights. It says that polygamy maintains and exasperates the subjugation of women. Well, I'm not exactly sure to what extent that refers to, but there is no, a woman has to obviously, within a marriage relationship, listen to her husband along, providing that he's asking her to do those things that are religiously expected of her to do. But other than that, she's not obliged to listen to him, especially if he's asking her to do something that is unreligious, right? That falls beyond the scope of the religion and that goes against the religion. He's not allowed to verbally or physically abuse her. She has every freedom of action, speech, and she can, and her ideas and opinions must be valued within the marriage. He must consult her before making certain decisions. So in terms of subjugation, this is not something that we find within Islamic marriage. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that marriages, including Muslim marriages, as with all marriages, that men and women and the dynamics within those marriages may not change or morph into something else. However, I'm just talking about what is the legal Islamic parameters of what a man and woman, what is expected of a man and a woman within the Islamic marital relationship. Now, another criticism is that women's economic, social, and emotional well-being can suffer in polygamous arrangements. I don't think this is necessarily due to polygamy. I mean, these types of things occur within non-polygamous marriages. Now, within Islamic marriage, however, justice is, like I said, is emphasized within this marriage, and ever more so within a polygamous marriage, to the extent that God says that if you're not able to be just, fair, and equitable, then it's better just to have one wife. Now, one wife simply doesn't negate the necessity and requirement of being just and fair. It just basically means that it would be easier for a man to be more just and fair with one wife than it would be for him to enter into other relationships. Another criticism is that polygamy disempowers women in their sexual relationships. The practice reflects a culture of misogyny, where women's desires and autonomy are often secondary to male privilege and control. While in Islam, in general, regardless of whether it's a polygamous relationship or not, one of the common or mutual rights of the couples is that the woman is expected to have her sexual needs fully met. And that means, and if you look at my previous video, we talk about this in a bit more depth, where even the Prophet and his successors, talk about that we shouldn't as men hurry to satisfy ourselves first before satisfying our wives, right, our spouses. That we should take our time with sexual intimacy with them, and that we should seek to sexually fulfill them thoroughly. And this, of course, is not only something that women ought to expect of their spouses, but this is something men as well should be expect from their from their wives as well. It goes both ways. So this is another critical right of both parties within the marriage, and certainly one of the conditions of a man who is in a polygamous relationship, where if he's not able to sexually satisfy his wives, then he shouldn't have multiple wives. Another feminist critique is that in polygamous societies, marriages are frequently arranged, leading to large age gaps between husbands and wives. Early widowhood is the result, and that these factors contribute to women's vulnerability. Now, I don't think that this is merely a polygamous issue. I think that in some cultures, they marry young, obviously this tendency of wealthy men within society having access to younger women has always been something that we see in society. Even in today's society, we see that. Obviously, it becomes problematic when we're talking about minors, where the women are minors. Obviously, that's a problem. However, I think a lot of, these, how these issues are interpreted to be considered issues or problem is, today we see how we socially construct womanhood today might not have been how ancient societies would have constructed womanhood. Womanhood might have been at a much younger age than it tends to be in today's age. And so if we're looking back and we're criticizing with a modern lens, it tends to be kind of problematic. In Islam, men and women can marry quite young, actually. In fact, a man and a woman, or a young man and a young woman, can marry as early as the age of 16, 17. In today's society, this would be considered problematic, right? They would be considered too young, socially speaking, and naive, socially speaking. But, in ancient societies, or only 1,000 years ago, this would not have been an issue. And so it depends on how we're looking at these issues. However, Islam encourages young marriages. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily mean that the woman has to marry a much older man, but I think that that's a cultural issue. And if some cultures condone that and find that acceptable, providing obviously she's not marrying someone that she hasn't consented to, and that she's not marrying at an age where she's a minor, then that's Islam is okay with that. So another critique is that instead of women capturing their own market value, husbands to be often make monetary payments, known as the bride price, to the bride's guardians. This economic dependence further limits women's independence and bargaining power. Yeah, of course, basically this means that when a woman doesn't have the freedom to choose who she wishes to marry, as Western women and European women do, they don't have the autonomy to leverage their market value. Now, their market value here obviously means that a woman, depending on how pretty she is, where she reside on this socioeconomic class within society, she may leverage that to get the type of man that she desires. Obviously, in this type of culture, she's not able to do that. Now, Islam, of course, categorically rejects any possibility of the bride price being usurped by either the groom or the parents. The bride price, or which is known as dowry within Islam, is strictly something that belongs to the wife, right, or the bride. And so Islam doesn't have any of this type of arrangement where a person can pay the bride price of the guardian, and the guardian benefits, and and it's kind of like a transactional arrangement where if the price is right, the person would give their daughter to this particular person. This doesn't work like that. Okay, so this is not something that we would see within Islam. And in addition to that, a woman cannot be married by her father or grandfather or anyone within her family without her consent and her acceptance. So a final criticism by feminists is that they say that the legal structure of marriage itself codifies underlying discrimination against women. Reports from polygamous communities often highlight early and forced marriages, where marriage serves as both a shield for and weapon of sexist behavior. Well, within Islam, Islam does not condone sexist behavior. Islam says that a man is not allowed to be violent towards his wife. He's not allowed to abuse her physically. He's not allowed to verbally abuse her. He's not allowed to financially abuse her or take advantage of her financially. In fact, like I said, at the cornerstone of this type of marriage, any marriage within Islam, is that he must be just. He must be fair and he must be equitable, both within the polygamous marriage, but also within a marriage where it's just him and one spouse, right? And that is something that needs to be highlighted and important to keep in mind. And in fact, Islam says, the Quran says that it is better to divorce a woman than to retain her and to treat her badly. All right, whether that's reflected in verbal abuse, or whether that's reflected in any other type of abuse and aggression. It's better to divorce, even though in Islam, divorce is something that is one of the worst things that a couple can do. But in spite of that, God said it's better to do that than to retain a spouse in that type of relationship. So I'm not saying that these things don't happen in relationships, that men can become abusive, men can become very sexist and misogynist, but this is not something that they are instructed. This is something that they are instructed against indulging in or partaking in within an Islamic marriage. In fact, Islamic marriage encourages men that teaches men that a woman has equal rights to the man with respect to how she should be treated, politely, gently, warmly, lovingly, and that her sexual needs need to be met, and that she needs to be provided for and maintained properly, and that even with respect to marriage, that if on one's first marriage the wife stipulates in the marriage contract prior to sealing the marriage that she does not want her husband to take additional wife after the marriage, after the signing of the marriage contract, then he is not able to do so, even though Islam has afforded him the right to have more than one wife. So these are things that a woman can do or can expect from an Islamic marriage. So in conclusion, Islam tolerates polygamy but imposes strict conditions that make its practice challenging. These include having sufficient financial resources, satisfying the sexual needs of each wife, and maintaining complete justice and equality among all wives. The Quran emphasizes justice, allowing polygamy only if men can treat all wives fairly. Islam asserts that men and women are equal partners in marriage, forced marriages are forbidden, and both spouses are entitled to sexual satisfaction and equal rights. Islamic teachings emphasize that consent and mutual respect are paramount in marriage. Thank you and Assalamu alaikum.